Julie here with Sirius Telus Moon, and I want to talk about a rather painful subject. This is what prompted me to press record. It is talking about France, but is something that I noticed is kind of global. And this is where they talk about the decline of the numbers. This is Le Monde, Pauline Grossian. The decline of numbers of birth, uh, seen in connection with gender divergence between increasingly progressive young women and increasingly conservative young men. Now, they pointed at the beginning of the core of the issue, but it has to do with the extortion cults and brotherhoods associated with those. So, as the trend in the brotherhoods, now Venus hour, Moon day, Venus 11 degrees Aquarius, the ascendant is conjoining the moon in Taurus. That applies to square this Venus. With the agenda to create chaos and divergence in society, kind of a Gog. So of course, gender wars is is highly accentuated. Now, with Uranus being in Taurus, yeah, they tried the tread wife. The most women got off the tread wife trend was, yeah, I also need to have my own house and land and food sovereignty and airspace because of all these chemtrails. Where's the husband? He should have his own property too, so we can, meet on the basis of wanting to meet each other. And I was like, that was not what we wanted with the tread wife trend. Like, what do you want? The women to poison their husband? Um, and then the men bought into something that is going to turn them into masses of anonymous graves. And, like, how does anybody expect a woman to woman when they don't provide for the safe, sensual, political, social, physical, energetical, astral, spiritual space for a woman to be a woman? And while in the past 2 decades, us women learn to not expect a man to change for us, love ourselves a little, connect with what we want, connect with what we don't want, and say what we want and what we don't want. Um, Not expect to rely on a man financially. Learn how to cultivate rest, not try to imitate men, being a lady boss. Reconnect with our feminine energy. And what can I say? The cult like human trafficking, trauma bond, addicted to humiliation, porn, fellow men fell out of those trees like leaves in the autumn. And when these are young men that couldn't catch up with that, it's an incredibly tragic story. Because while us women were preparing for the love that we actually do want, the sex that we actually do want, the business that we actually do want, the housing and the garden that we actually do want, rewilding not only between our legs, but also in our backyards. Then the um, those type of societies that were based on demeaning, decreasing, and then siphoning energy and copycatting, it doesn't it doesn't work. And when young men were taught to be like that, they were sold on something that is meant to bubble pop. They were sold on Mormon talks. They were sold on waiting for a woman to learn how to let go while they were not learning how to provide a safe space for a woman to woman. They were sold on ego trips, and there was really, and you know what? The men that do talk are considered softs and losers, while they around families and households and are fathers that people love to be around. They don't try to be sexual with women that they don't build something with. And men were so the upside down of what would make them happy, thriving, prosperous, successful, desired, sexy, orgasmic. And here is the thing, the, the teachings were available. I know, I sold these courses. And you know who were the clients? Married men. And they were so secretive. When we came to the course of how to please a woman, okay, how to make a woman orgasm and so on, because at first the company started, it's not my company, with self pleasure and so on and so forth, and only then how to communicate with men. So people needed to come out of the people pleasing. But when there was one course that turned to the male audience, it was almost immediately sold out. And the men were so fucking secretive about particularly the transaction, and all of them, nearly all of them, were married. They were just coming to improve their sex life. So while the married men were keeping up to speed, those of them that didn't fall out, because those that are interested in fraternities, it completely abrupted their marriages because they would try to control their wife while the women were blooming and shining, learning to take risks, um, connecting with their own orgasmic self, redefining, questioning, are they monogamous, not monogamous, not from a trying to control the world agenda, but from an actual self regeneration embodiment, getting to know us as women. Now, those women were dealing with things that attempted to isolate them, to collapse them into a state that is not authentic to them. And what we have is ripe women and a lot of men that grew into a bubble pop, trying to control, demean, and expect the woman to submit to them when they act in this way, or turn into the same God that annihilated the female aspect of divinity and expecting them to be nice to a woman and then she will submit. No, it's not just about nice to a woman, it's about a woman having her own divinity and is not the same God that broke cows and exiled everyone. And so these young men began to see women growing, prosperous, going through the shadow work, wishing to share the knowledge, the insights, the resources. But coming against these women and becoming more and more congested in something that never yielded happy, thriving homes. And you know what? As an astrologer, they will all have that illusion, and then their wife cheats, and they're heartbroken. How could she have? Because they were sold out on the illusion that they can be conservative, which basically means depriving women of women's rights, and have happy homes. Just as women were coming out of both the paradigm of, not only the paradigm of housewife, that was 150 years ago, but also the paradigm of um, the overworked lady boss. If a woman was next to a man that was more the provider, then she would have a side gig that later became world renowned. Her little business was growing. Now, the couples that sustain are the couples where usually the man was providing for the woman's business ideas. And if they re-engaged in a more equal power status with one another, then those are the couples that, that she has this YouTube channel, this making more money than even her husband, and her husband has his own. And usually these men also have something that is kind of unusual. It's something that is like they're not working in a humdrum job. They're not bored in their job. But other than those, granted that these didn't have to become informants as well, um, indeed, this growing gap is beyond sad because what we would expect is men leaning into the ability to be men and enjoying the orgasmic life of intimacy, for, making money from somewhere we're actually passionate about, a lifestyle of making a life or making a living. And it got stuck at the men being sold out on something. And it begs the question why, and the only answer is fraternities. The only answer is secret societies. The only answer is soul trade societies. The only answer is slavery-based agendas. The generation that couldn't let women be women, and those were not just men, there was also women. Okay, Ghislaine Maxwell wasn't a man as far as I know. Okay, she was crossing as woman at least. Okay, so, And those young men were looted because those older generations were like, come on, I'll show you how to make money. How? Oh, you see these women connecting with their vagina? Traffic them. Siphon the energy. You will get house, you will get access to networking, and then you will be able to be with many girls, even with younger girls. And the women were like looting over that too, because there's another person that they later can extort for whatever business they run to be a part of the lobbying. And what happened is that the men got looted by the extortion calls. Young men. And then they expect for someone to continue their legacy when they've made every single thing against having one. Now, what we get is a situation where we have very young men. If in the past it was men in their 20s becoming addicted to porn, but then doing something about it because they're like, it cannot be that at 20, even less, a young man has erectile dysfunction. Okay? And then they learned about what all these things in porn were doing to their brain. And then they learned about their childhood traumas and so on. But but when it is already extortion calls, when it's not just, I'm sorry, masturbating to footage and later learning that, oh, wait, these women were trafficked, so wait, is there feminist porn? Okay, I remember 2, 3 years ago, there was or 5 years ago even, was a lot of movement of people, men asking, wait a second, maybe there is feminist porn. And these were healthy men seeking to enjoy seeing a woman orgasm. Opening up to the spiritual realms, no longer being ashamed of the sexuality. But that got again looted by, oh, there were women that this was their sacred job. And they bought into that because it's so mythically erotic to think that there's somebody whose sacred job is to. Um, um, but then something happened and the men got looted. And they got looted by becoming a part of extortion cult, by entering trafficking scams. And by going through those torture rites and rituals. And then they would become addicted to the image of wealth, what people call greediness. They weren't born this way. And you hear young men, saying, what, if a woman cheats, it's okay to murder her, but they are trafficking women. Young men partaking in business endeavors of investments, of rings that work in threes, so that if one drops, then the other two, and it's all money laundering of torture and trafficking and enslaving women. And then they wonder. They call themselves conservative and wonder why women would not continue their legacy. When in those societies the children are raped and tortured. While women were learning about orgasmic birthing and how even the architecture of the housing needs to support being able to have an orgasm. I repeat, even the architecture of the housing needed to support having orgasmic birthing. How does one practice that? Um, Being loud. Throat chakra, sex chakra. Even the food, one of the things that we were taught in the sex positive courses was even if we have a food, and it happens to me with essential oil, if I smell the orchids right now, I go from and here is the thing, okay, it's kind of like and those things became so natural, and then there's this conservative men that try to enslave, humiliate, constrain, betray, in treason courts, deprive of voting, of economy, of sovereignty, is like not orgasmic. And what they already are engaged in is crimes against humanity. Look at this on the minute, on the minute. 18 degrees, 00, 18 degrees. One more minute, we're exiting the 18 degrees. So it's a great time to unroot these toxic beliefs and the toxic structures. Because these young men, they're not missing out on all the action. They're missing out on their families and loving wives and children and loving homes and careers and legacies and not just pride, but joy of living. And some of them get into ego trips. I'm 41 years old woman. Some men get into really almost convoluted stages with themselves because they can't contain something, but they're constrained in, not just young men, okay, okay, but they're constrained in. Some of the younger people are constrained in having to promote that the Me Too went too far. And even women, okay, that awaken to their own. I remember when I was in university, there was a lady that was helping me literally to fold my clothes because I was alone. I wouldn't do that when I was in the room. And she was like, "You have a dildo?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "I'm married with children. I don't have a dildo." I'm like, "Oh, get yourself one." But I never tried that. But it's important. How can you be with your husband if you don't know what you like? To the point that eventually I was ritually abused and tortured, so much so that I couldn't even, they were doing rituals even on a dildo. To try to prevent sexual sovereignty. And it's not about something being special about me. any woman that began to reconnect with herself, it's not just the self-pleasure, it is also the business endeavors. The questioning about birthing. Am I child-free because I chose so, or because I can't afford having children? What is the type of lifestyle that I would like my children to have? Um, uh, how do people reach orgasmic birthing? Um, and then the women around, they're very triggered. They want from that, but they don't know how to grasp with that. And it triggers everyone. Before anything men, women were triggered. Women were in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, never really orgasmed on relaxed arousal, which means they never really orgasmed. Internal cervical orgasm was considered something that women were pressured to, not something that they wanted to explore within themselves. But how can one surrender to a treason cult that tries to lower the frequency and siphon the energy? And sleep with younger girls and younger girls and younger girls and younger girls and gaslight and control, and doesn't work with that. And then when it comes to the housing, that exposed everything. And if I think about the ingress of Uranus to Taurus, 2018 to now 2026, okay, less than 10 years, even the younger men couldn't catch up with that. Then what happened as women began to have business, and business became scalable business? Either some women crossed the threshold of LLC, bought a house even, and then the satanic cults came. And some women, they were trying to loot. It's like, okay, so and so lineage that put me to trauma so much that I would have be in a situation where I would be having my blood taken so that they can see what's in the blood. So and so lineage want a baby from so and so lady. For the baby, it's important for to have orgasmic conception, orgasmic birthing, good upbringing. That exposed the cloning project. Now, why was this woman suddenly pinpointed? Because she's but a woman in her 40s or growing to 35, back then started maturation, looking so taking care of herself, radiant. But then they want to take that and harm that. You cannot have a flower under your control. And even the most red-pilled men began to speak up and say to young men, a woman, if you hold her like that, she becomes from beautiful woman to the woman that you have allowed her to be by your side. And then, of course, he wants a divorce. And then if you try to do that to other women, I say, oh, that one's 40 and no children yet. There's a reason why she wants to maintain her glow. But what? Because of that, how can she give orgasmic birthing if there's no partner that allows for orgasmic conception, birthing, and parenting experience? How will we travel the world if we don't manifest that? And if we don't manifest that, cannot be with those cult-like trauma bonds, trafficking rings. Where would the plane land? Yes. This is scary. But here is the thing. Only with the orgasmic woman and it's not the orgasmic woman because other women are not orgasmic. It's because women are orgasmic. But they need to be provided for the safety to be themselves. Only with that woman can anybody build anything. What will I water the plants with if I don't? And if that is used to try to siphon and enslave people and turn it into Epstein Islands, then I don't water anymore. I'm not joking. After I was literally homeless because Jupiter was in Pisces, okay? Because I was sensual with myself, I could manifest, and then I entered a dwelling that was a trafficking place, and I couldn't water anymore. I couldn't be anymore. I couldn't be sensual, I couldn't be myself anymore. And no matter what I tried, I said, okay, so reinvest in turning the land over, digging half moons, shadow work, political assassination prevention. And there was nothing that was ready for me to be an orgasmic, happy, thriving, prosperous woman that could have given birth, grown children, travel the world, make money from a business that is actually authentic to the self. And that opportunity is not, oh, it's closed window. No. And this is why I'm standing and looking as a woman, 41, or I'll be 42 this years old, and I'm saying, my God, young men are missing out on life because of those trafficking rings. Young women are growing to believe that men are like this and men are like that and men are like that. You know, I heard women say that men being provider is a myth. No, it's not. It's only a myth when they are tortured in those trafficking cults. When boys are raped by boys and then they have to rape, and then how can they provide? But when we address those trafficking cults, we see that it's not just a phenomenon that it's out there as, oh, human trafficking is so terrible. Yes, child slavery is so terrible, so terrible. It is an entire society being at on hold because of that. This is what I talk about when I say the grand missing. People's energy, life force, and labor is not to be looted, bartered, siphoned, copycatted, and controlled. Then they stop having this life force. And then men at loss of self try to reconnect with the divine. It's not a bad thing, but the divine that is offered to them is the one that annihilates any chance of being happy, in love, and not heartbroken, let down, or feeling betrayed. While women were exposed to the erotic intelligence by Esther Perel, jade egg courses booming, okay, like mushrooms after the rain. The glass dildo and the obsidian dildo and the not the rabbit one because of for the tantric not to force an orgasm and the communication of how the solution oriented and the just listening oriented communication skills and how to adjust the business to their menstrual cycle and the orgasmic birthing and the water birthing at hospital that enjoy men were bombarded with the Andrew Tates. Men were deprived and even for women it's like yeah connect with God yes of course because of with God you will only have someone that honors you and then men were promised a woman that would submit to them while they're trafficking children and sleeping with 12 years olds boys or girls by a clergyman that does the same and lifts his two fingers conjoined to the horn god. The minute they try to take over the sexual experiences of men, then the men believe that something works, and now they're really trapped because they don't know how to make it work in another way. Um, Going back to something that Annika Lucas said in the interview with Andrew with the Heretics, and she said, I went through the hard way of feeling my emotions and actually healing is kind of like it was the hard way, but it was the right way. And I think young men are so enmeshed with having a sexual experience that works with the shit tons of drugs, then being associated. A man once described to me that he was basically a lady that was trafficked, but he didn't know. He thought it was a working lady. And his friend paid for this. And he described his experience as he wasn't seeing woman. She was wearing a mask, and me and my friend, my female friend, was sitting there, and he said that he was disoriented, was everything compartmentalized, and he was so like sexual organs, not with the real person, and he had to literally rape himself to rape her. And years later, they would talk about, well, yeah, he was not loved there. It's a trauma. And of course, that makes it very difficult because now he has to recover from sexual trauma where he raped himself. He was both the victim, but he was not the victim of that woman, and was also perpetrator towards woman. And there's absolutely no one to teach him that he has the right to take up space, because he would have to disengage with some fraternity, brotherhood, that was a rite of passage to. And maybe he wasn't even informed. Now his energy was siphoned through the handler of that woman, which could have been his friend, his male friend. And there's no one to turn to because one cannot even diagnose the problem. And everybody's therapy session is paid to preserve this existential crisis so that he will keep spending money. You know, I talked about a neighbor that took antidepressants, and she has house and so on. It's not like she's in risk of losing her fortune, but she would spend so much money in IKEA when she doesn't even host. So much money. Now, here is the thing. It's lovely. It was her joy of living, shopping. There's nothing wrong with that. But if the neighbors, there were lesbian neighbors, they were making love at the other building, she began to shout at them to stop because she couldn't hear that. Not rethink housing, for wait a second, they need a place to make love, and she needs a place to sleep, but there's something else there that could have undergoverned the dozens of shoppings in IKEA. Now, for IKEA, it's a big problem, because if all these women stop shopping in IKEA, the business goes bankrupt. If you go to IKEA today, everything is on sale. And not only that, when we begin to realign, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of weirdnesses and taboo issues that we need to address. It's kind of like, wait a second, let's say data man. Important to make sure we don't have, Epstein-Barr syndrome. You know what is Epstein-Barr? They made a disease over it. Is mononucleosis is a nervous system, or any other, STDs. With what doctor? The one that molested children by Epstein Island, because he's world renowned, his reputation is a. What happens if there is an accident? And at the same time, nearly none of us had a functioning family that is an inspiration. And not only that, it's down there where the was the grand missing. It's not just a cloning project by the elite. Why, when I tend to my toenail fungi, I feel like I begin to almost release orgasmic? What's releasing from that congestion? Why is there no safe space to orgasm in the world? Or to sleep or to rest? How are people like living? We're living in places that don't allow. This is quite, a building is 40 years. and, and the only buildings that allow sex to happen in them are trafficking places. Then people smoke and drink. And people say, for the asexual, the aromantic, what is demisexual? I used to say that. Yes, I'm demisexual. What is demisexual? You know, none of that dumb fuckery, sex trafficking oriented. Demisexual, how can one say that? Loving, sensual, orgasmic, seeing me as the person, and allowing me to be me, have my dreams, have my own personality, my own space. Yes, so in code name, demisexual. If you're not that man, ga weg, get lost. We had to come up with code names for something you're supposed to be basis. When literally nothing around us is designed for actual orgasm, not misplaced arousal, rape induced, something to ease the trauma. And yet everybody wants what do these women do? What do these glowy people do? And nobody has any concept for that. In less than a decade, something has completely revolutionized. And the world is not ready. The world was not ready for that. The world is exploding now because even the youngest thought that, oh, it's a phase. It's a phase. Of course, it settles into where is making a life or making a living, traveling the world. We have all the answers. It's not just the ritual abuse, trafficking, elite cults. It's the entire spell cast on reality that was broken. So much so as we realign with our own sensual energy. There is sex chakra, there is root chakra, there is earth star chakra, there is crown chakra. There is a place and a home and a land and a real estate and a housing and food sovereignty and crops and everything that supports us is there if we don't harm it. And it's impossible not to say that something was by purpose casting a deprivation upon humanity. That is unnatural. And everybody's triggered. Everybody's triggered. And the young man that had no one to basically see as an inspiration, where they had to reinvent themselves, a lot of them were looted. They began to long for a myth that they never lived, for something that never actually existed. And if it did, it ended up in cheating, in heartbreak, in poison, in um, um, trafficking, in financial crisis. Like, because the feminism today is not the aggressive feminism of be like the man in everything, is completely different. Is for me to woman as a woman, I need both my authentic sexuality honored, my business to be benevolent to me and to society. Exploitation would ruin my orgasm, even if I would be on the exploiting party. And I need to protect my feminine energy. I can't be with a person that I need to constantly protect my feminine energy in the face of. And young women are seeing that more and more. They try to create approximation for us. Trad wife, soft life. None of that works. And there's a calling for a different type of wealth. Women were tortured and humiliated for being women. That's not an environment to grow children. I don't know a single woman that didn't have to deal with attempts to traffic her. Sometimes by her husband or partner or best friend or bestie. And it's not always happening to women that are vulnerable, no. It's happening when women align with themselves and society hasn't caught up with a woman being a woman. And society hasn't caught up with being able to provide for life to grow.